Welcome to Trulyfit.
Lisa, thank you so much for joining the Trulyfit Podcast. Why don't you give my audience and listeners a little background on who you are and what it is that you do in the health and fitness world?
Okay, great. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity to be on your podcast. So I am Lisa Salisbury. I run the Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well podcast, and I'm a health coach, weight loss coach, life coach. So primarily, I actually usually introduce myself as a life coach for health and weight loss because I primarily work with a lot of the emotional side of eating, which I specifically didn't say emotional eating because people have kind of a negative connotation with that. Like, oh, I don't really cry face down in a container of ice cream. But there is the emotional side of eating that keeps us eating or keeps us from eating specific things that is really critical. So I consider myself also a recovered chronic dieter. Most of my clients come from a dieting background, which statistically isn't that hard to find because by the time women reach my age, I'm in my late 40s, we've done 40 to 60 diets. So the statistics are really staggering how many times a woman has attempted to lose weight. And that's not necessarily different diets, but like that's how many times we've started again on Monday kind of attitude. Mm-hmm. So you might have done, sure. Like for me, the South Beach diet several times. So when I finally kind of got off the roller coaster of being on a specific diet with a diet plan and a book and someone else telling me what to do, and started to really just kind of gather all of that information and realize what really worked well for my body and getting in tune with that. That's where I sort of settled down into kind of what I call eating like a normal person. Like normal people just eat and they don't make like a big dramatic deal. We don't make excuses for being hungry, and we're not dramatic about being hungry either. Just eat when we need to. So that's kind of the aim for my clients.
The emotional term is interesting. I was just thinking about this as you said it, and there's something about the term emotional or emotions that makes some people feel, and maybe even myself, as if they're not controlling them. When you use the term psychological or mental, it's like, oh, we can work on this, like maybe subconscious thing. But something about emotions brings out like, oh, like you're weak, like you're letting this take you over, as opposed to the term psychological or mental, which is really all the same thing, unless you disagree, where it really is. A lot of these things probably are just subconscious. It's not like you're making the decision to do this. We just have to kind of bring this up front in consciousness. You have to tune into your body so that you can make the better decisions.
Sure. Yeah. The way I define emotions is just, those are just chemicals that are going through your body because of a thought that you have had. So you have a thought like, I'm really bored, and then the emotion of boredom actually floods through your body. Or you're about to come on a podcast with a new person, and my brain is like, ooh, I'm really nervous. And then I feel butterflies in my stomach, right? That emotion of anxiety or nerve like floods through my body, and I can feel it in different parts of my body. That's what emotion is. The psychological component is really what I separate out as into thoughts. So I do actually a lot of work between separating thoughts and emotions, because some of our thoughts are happening, most of them, to be honest, are just happening through our habit brain, just subconsciously as well as just on loop. But we can make some decisions about what we're thinking in order to feel certain ways.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to describe it, especially when you talk in more of a science-based approach, so it's not so abstract, and they can really understand that, everyone's dealing with this. You have some sort of thought processes or emotions that come up, and we're going to work through this together to get to a better place. And we'll talk about that more down the road. But what I want to focus on here is you talk about something, and it's a term that's been used probably for, I don't know, maybe how long, 50 to 100 years. Clean the plate. All of our parents have said it at some point. It's been around for so long, Lisa, that at some point they said, you must clean your plate because there's kids in China who are starving. And then, now China's GDP has shot up, 9% every year for 30 years. So now they say you must clean your plate because there's kids in Africa starving, right? That's how long this term has been around. They've been changing the analogies used around it. What exactly does it mean to you? And why do you maybe not like this term?
Yeah. So before I tell you what it means to me, I'm going to just echo on how long it's been around. The Clean Plate Club was actually started as a government program during World War I. So you can find like war posters that they put up in elementary schools and just teaching the kids that they needed to clean their plate because there were rations. And so the idea was you take as much as you are needing, but you finish to demonstrate that you didn't take more than what you needed. And in that way, we maintain, the ability to send food to the troops and to the European countries that needed it. It was resurfaced again after World War II, which means in the early 40s. So I'm 47. So that would be my grandparents as well as my parents, both were in the era where they were in the Clean Plate Club in their elementary school, like literally. Like we call it a club, but it was like, no, literally they established these across the country. So it's no wonder when they said, hey, clean your plate, there's starving kids in Europe. That's what they told them in the 40s. That's what was happening. So then in the 80s, when I was a child, there were starving kids in Africa. Of course they said that. Yeah. So yeah, from a historical perspective, like it's not just a collective term that we use just randomly. It was literally a government program. And what it means to me and how it affects my clients is now there's just all these thoughts that it's like, well, I should clean my plate. I'm supposed to. I've been told. So it's a lot of historical in your own life, kind of primary programmers from your childhood. But then we also have these concepts of value and money and, well, I need to get my money's worth out of this, or if I throw this food away, it's a waste. And so we have a lot of these types of thoughts that also are part of the I need to clean my plate type things. And then the other aspect is just habit. We just do because we always have. And that's not to be taken lightly because our brain loves to be efficient, which means anything it can delegate down to that lower habit brain, it will. And eating a lot of times is down there in that habit brain. And so you clean your plate also because you always have.
Yeah, you have to think about all those cultural things that have been passed down, right? So you had maybe grandparents who were in the Great Depression who passed down those things to your parents. And it was all about, hey, this food costs, someone's not eating, and make sure you clean your plate. Maybe, there was a time, like my mother was one of 9, where people just had more kids, right? It was more normal to have a larger family. So you're competing with other people in your family, maybe for every bite of food. And these things have changed as far as maybe the cultural time frame and the finances and things we're dealing with. But that doesn't mean that what's ingrained into your brain from your parents and their parents before them have changed, right?
Totally.
So how do you work with clients? Let's start with the throwing out the food for clients to say, hey, listen, I don't want to throw away food from a financial standpoint. There's just something ingrained in me that says, finish this, it costs money. How do you work with clients who ask that question?
So there's a couple ways that this comes up. Number one, it's at home. And number two, it's at restaurants. So when you're thinking about being at a restaurant and you say, well, I paid for this, and so I don't want to throw it out, you have to really consider what you're paying for. Part of what I pay for when I go to a restaurant is not doing the dishes. Part of what I pay for when I go to a restaurant is like not having to hunt and gather all the groceries and do the cooking, right? Like there's a lot more value than just the how much it fills you up, right? So we got to think of the value of what we're getting when we go to a restaurant. It's far, far more than what the food costs. In fact, I think restaurants, if you watch those like reality shows about restaurants, like food cost is actually pretty minimal for restaurants. Like there's just so much else you're paying for. So just thinking about the value that we're getting and just, maybe it's just a night out with your partner. So that also has value regardless of how much you eat. When you're at home, it's a little different because you have gone and purchased those groceries and gone to the effort to make the food. So there's some of that you are considering as well. It's not just the dollar amount that you paid for the food. So we want to really, if you really want to get serious about thinking about the cost of your food, there are cost calculators that you can actually cost out your dinners. It's actually crazy how much you save by cooking at home, you're not actually throwing away. When you're talking about 3 or 4 bites on your plate, it's pennies. When you cost it out, like, it is so insignificant. So sometimes just gaining the knowledge of what it actually is helps you to be like, this is totally fine. And other times you can just bring this to your awareness. I think for a lot of my clients, they just don't have the permission to be like, actually, I can stop when I'm satisfied. I don't have to actually clean my plate because there's no one here telling me that it's a waste. It's only my brain. And when they get the permission, when I say like, okay, well, we can waste that food in the trash and we can waste the 25 cents that food costs, or we can waste the time, effort, and mental energy to get it off your body. If you eat food that your body does not need for the day, you will store it. So you can throw it in the trash or you can store that extra food on your body, because we're not talking about food that we need, right? We're talking about excess food. So that becomes a waste of time and energy on your body. So either way, you're going to waste it.
That's good information. And just to add to your restaurant piece, it's maybe slightly deviating a bit, but certain people just don't want to go out to eat. And they'll say things like, well, it's too expensive and things like this. But, we're also paying for kind of like a worldly cultured experience. You're getting to try foods you've maybe never tried before. You're getting to learn about different foods. You're getting to see different things. There is an important part about going out to eat. Even me as a personal trainer, it was a large discussion I would have with clients about the best restaurants in town, let's say, right? Food is a big conversation piece amongst people. And if you're the person who's only eating at home, cooking your own food, right? All I'm eating is lean chicken and broccoli every day, and you're so food obsessed. You're on the other end of the spectrum. You're going to lose a lot in that sort of cultural, worldly values and connecting with people as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a lot of what we pay for when we go out as well, is like, I don't make Indian food at home because I don't know how. So yeah. I pay for someone else to know how. I go to this really amazing Indian place because they know how.
Yeah, touche. And sometimes those ingredients are actually more expensive. You look at all like the fine ingredients in like a Thai meal. It's like, well, by the time I buy all these ingredients, if I don't make Thai on a regular basis, they're just going to sit in my cabinet. It's probably going to cost me more than to just get it made by somebody who knows what they're doing. But, going back to the clean your plate mentality, let's say, would you say this is something that a lot of people struggle with, the average population? I think I'm so far removed from that because I've always had this... I've always been someone to work out once or twice a day just because I enjoy it. I'm a personal trainer. I'm always moving around. I don't necessarily think about what I'm eating, but is this something that the average family is dealing with on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I would say yes. Obviously, I haven't done, this is just like based on my client experience. I would say yes, because, and a couple of reasons for that. I see it on social media. I see people trying to get, especially like moms, to stop doing this to their kids, right? Like you're creating unhealthy habits here. So I see that, as well as just the clients that come to me. I do a unit on wasting food and just tossing your clean. I'm always like, I revoke your Clean Plate Club membership. Like, it's not even a cool club. You don't get your picture in the yearbook. It's dumb. Like we talk about that. And for most of them, it's a struggle. And it's every once in a while, I'll have a client that's like, oh, it's fine. I can throw away food. And so we just like skip that unit with them. That's fine. But for most, and I primarily work with women, for most women, it's been an issue in the past. And a lot of times too, and this isn't something I mentioned as far as the clean plate mentality, is a lot of it is, I want to finish because it tastes good. And so there's that aspect, as well as is like, well, I'm going to ignore the fact that I'm full because I want to eat more and finish what's here because it's available and it tastes good. And so we have this misconception that more of this food is going to increase the experience and the enjoyment of it, which is actually the opposite is true, because once we've reached comfortable fullness, the experience of eating more, it's actually going to decrease. The enjoyment is actually going to decrease the more and more uncomfortable your body gets. the experience of eating that food actually doesn't get better. Does that make sense? Because we think like, well,
Sure.
more of it, it's like, it's so delicious, I want to keep enjoying it. Yes, it's enjoyable in the mouth, it's enjoyable in the brain, but your full body experience of it actually decreases the more full and uncomfortable that you get.
As a personal trainer, I have ways to, let's say, trick my clients. I can get them to work muscles and body parts, not even know that they're doing it. But ultimately, that's not always a good thing, because I want them to, what we call, engage the muscle, understand that they're activating it and using it, right? I want to be honest with them about what they're doing. So I imagine there are sort of tricks, right? As someone who's a nutritionist or a dietitian, like maybe this is one of them, making a smaller plate, right? Instead of having large plates. If all of my plates are small, then even if I want to, let's say, eat everything off my plate, then maybe that solves part of the problem. But maybe it doesn't, right? Maybe that also leads to bad psychological habits because you're not understanding the problem. Are there tricks to the trade? Do you think it's just best to explain things to your client rather than try to trick them?
I think you definitely can use tools. I try to use the word tools, not tricks. I know what you mean, though.
Touché.
The other day I woke up and I was like, why am I sore right here? What exercise did I do that like made me sore in that spot? So I know you mean that sometimes we're working things we don't realize, but for eating, honestly, the first thing is just really to become aware of this. Like, just to tell people, listen, you do not actually have to eat everything on your plate. Like, your mom is not going to come and punish you. If you still want dessert, like, you totally can. It's up to you. Like, all of this, like, part of it is just bringing it to the awareness. And then secondly, I just honestly think practice is the biggest thing. And it's kind of like with exercise where you're like, okay, I want you to engage this muscle. Like, it takes practice to really focus and concentrate on that. I just have my clients practice the first week we're doing this, leave 2 bites behind at every meal. Get used to seeing a little bit of food on your plate. It's not a lot. It's not going to activate that like major I'm wasting area of their brain when it's just 2 bites. And it's probably not going to make a huge difference in their hunger as well. So it's just a practice of it's okay to see food on the plate and throw that down the trash, throw that in the sink. Like, nothing bad happened. And so it sort of alleviates some of the anxiety that the brain has about, I need to finish that. And it starts to break the habit. So that's really the first trick or tool that I have my clients use is I just want you to leave 2 bites behind. And it's a great exercise, honestly, for any of us to do, because even though I said it doesn't affect your hunger dramatically, it can add up to quite a bit of food over the course of a week if you're leaving 2 bites behind at every meal. And you can really start to decide, like, maybe I'm dishing up a little too much. And so then the next week, the idea is to dish up 2 bites less and see how you do. See if you can leave two bites again. Sort of, it's kind of in conjunction with how much, the total volume that we're eating as well. But I do love that idea of just giving it some practice to leave some food behind. If you're at a restaurant, it depends on where you're at, right? If you're at Olive Garden, you're probably going to want to cut that meal in half, right? If you're at a super nice French restaurant, you probably aren't going to be leaving 2 bites behind. It's because the portions are going to be, tiny. So it just depends on the portions that you're being served at a restaurant, if 2 bites is appropriate or, cutting it in half or in thirds.
You mentioned at the beginning of that, I thought it was funny that your mom's not going to come out and yell at you if you're not cleaning your plate, which instantly made me think of also the sort of the reverse. I'm not sure if you work with, let's say, parents and children of any sort, but what could I be doing as a new father, maybe moving forward, so that my kid doesn't have these bad habits or bad nutritional, let's say, mental landscape sort of built in to their day-to-day processes of foods? Are there things you recommend for parents or, to talk to their kids and how they present food to their children?
Yeah, I am totally interested in this. And I actually have a guest scheduled for my podcast to talk about this because I'm not an expert in childhood nutrition. Mm-hmm. For the most part, though, what I've established at my home, and to be fair, my kids are older. So I don't have the little ones anymore. I have teenagers and actually two that are out of the house. So they get to do what they want. But the teenagers that are home, we no longer have the clean plate rule and haven't for several years. The idea that if you want dessert, you have to finish your dinner. And the reason for that, I think that's just the first rule to throw out, because it emphasizes that dessert is a reward. Somehow we are rewarding the idea of overeating at dinner in order to get this sweet thing. So I've seen several theories about serving dessert with dinner, like right on the plate at the same time. And I haven't done enough research on that, but I think it's fascinating. I think it's like, just to say this is all food, and we're practicing eating all of it together. You can eat it in whatever order you want, but it eliminates the good bad food mentality, which I think is really, really helpful. I had one of my teenagers the other day, and she's 17. She's plenty capable of deciding how much she needs to eat. I had made a dessert. So every night I don't make a dessert, but I had made like this little mango tart. And so she knew that was going to be happening after dinner. And we were clearing dinner before we had dessert, and she had quite a bit of food on her plate. And she was like, I got too much. And I was like, okay. And she's like, is it okay? Like, she was super worried about it. And I was like, yeah, it's totally fine, because she was like, I want to eat a slice of the mango tart. And so she made that decision to stop eating it was like rice and beans, like to stop eating that Cajun rice and beans in order to leave space in her body for that mango tart. And I was like, absolutely. Like, I am finally breaking through to them.
This is going to seem extremely hypocritical, because we're sitting here having a conversation all about food. But I think not talking about food so much is really sometimes the way to go with the kids, right? So it's not, do I present the dessert with the food? Do I put this in a certain order? How much do I put it? It's just like, maybe just not have so much conversation surrounding it. Like, don't point it out. Even like when you're an adult and you're with your parents, right? Let's say you're in your 30s, right? We had this with our in-laws. Well, they'll just sort of point out like, hey, you didn't eat all your food. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, well, like, I know that. And also I'm 37 years old, and I ate an hour before I came here. You just didn't know that. So I think, the references to what other people are doing with their food all the time at the dinner table, including your teenagers, not yours specifically, I'm just saying teenagers in general, seems to be part of the problem too, right? Just it's so ingrained in us to look at other people's plates and like make some sort of judgment and then say it out loud, when it's best to just maybe not be said at all. Totally.
And I think along those lines too is I notice people, and it's a factor with my parents, as my mom as well, is I didn't eat very much breakfast, so I'm going to have a whole sandwich for lunch, right? Like this excuse about why I'm eating what I'm eating. Like, you just can eat. It's fine. You don't have to, you don't have to tell us.
Yeah, and if you're telling that to yourself, that's fine, but you don't have to like say it out loud. To say like, oh, you know what, I had a really hard workout yesterday, so I'm gonna like eat this piece of pizza. It's like, not everything has to be you like earned it and like everything's worth a point and you're like crossing off these lists. It's like you can just live life on a normal basis. With that said, I don't think we're all a little bit different. I'm sure you could speak to this. There are maybe some clients and some people who do work better slightly regimented. Doesn't have to be a strict regimen, and you can argue otherwise and say no, but like, for instance, I've talked about this before, I have all my dinners written down for 7 days on a big whiteboard in my kitchen. Now, I don't eat them all exactly in order. The portion size isn't on there, right? I'm not like how I'm cooking them, but it might be like, okay, I'm having bratwurst and a vegetable and rice on Monday, and on Tuesday I'm having some sort of a chicken quesadilla. And if I want to make Tuesday's dinner on Monday and Monday's dinner on Tuesday, that's fine. It depends on a lot of different things going on in my life. How much time do I have to cook that week? What did my wife eat for lunch? Was it the same? Did she also eat Mexican for lunch? I can't make Mexican on later on for dinner. All of these things vary, but I have a general idea of what I'm going to eat, not just from a health perspective, but also it just makes sure that I'm not running around like a chicken with my head cut off last second trying to search for something to make for dinner.
Yeah, totally. I'm a big fan of planning. Go ahead.
Yeah, and you're fine with clients doing things like that. You don't think that's a bad thing for them to have a generalized outline.
Oh no, for sure. We do a lot of planning, because if you're not doing that, you got to go to the grocery store every single day, or be eating frozen food, or right. Like if we're not planning what we're having, it's you go into the kitchen and you're like, I can't make great decisions at this point because you're just kind of in desperation mode. So I do have my clients. So we create a 24-hour plan every day. So each morning they just write down what they're going to have for the day, and you just make your food decisions once in the morning, and then you don't have to think so much about food along those lines of not having to talk about it so much. You just decide, I'm going to have oatmeal for breakfast. I'm going to have leftovers last night's quesadilla for lunch, and making beans and rice for dinner. Most of my clients, we plan dinners week at a time because they go to the store and they plan those. I have a couple clients that like to even do some meal prep as far as like cooking a few meals on the weekends because of their schedules. You can't possibly know if you are going to need to cook ahead if you don't like look at your calendar, just make some decisions ahead of time. Like anytime you can make food decisions ahead of time, you're using your higher brain. Because when we make decisions in the moment, we're almost always using our lower brain, which is it's that habit part. It's that part that wants that instant hit of dopamine. And it's not that we can't make excellent decisions in the moment. It's just that we're very much more likely to make decisions based on our future goals when we do it ahead, because you cannot use your lower brain to make plans. It's not its function. You have to use your higher human brain to make plans. So every time we can use our higher brain to make food decisions, they're going to almost always be better. Like you just don't plan chocolate cake for breakfast, right? You just don't.
Yeah, touche. Yeah, and some of that becomes from, like as a personal trainer in our industry, typically we'll work like 50 to 55 minute sessions with a client. So if you're good at what you do, you might have 8 appointments back to back to back, right? You might go in the morning and not necessarily even book a break, which is a bad thing to do. I always tell people book a half-hour break somewhere in between so that you're not hangry. But if you don't have food on hand, it's going to be bad, right? If you do get that half-hour break, you're going to go to the first place, which is typically like fast food or something packaged,
machine. Yeah,
and you're going to stuff your face as fast as you can, right? That's even the people I'm sure you work with 9-to-5ers who, for some reason, maybe eat lunch at like 11:30 and they don't get done with work until 6 and they haven't eaten between point A and point B. And the second they get home, while their dinner's in the oven, they've already housed a whole box of Pringles or whatever, right? So it's like, okay, well, you could have made a better decision by just having some sort of like nuts on hand that you could have ate at 3 o'clock to hold you over so you were satiated until dinner, right? There's just those small things that help involve planning on a day-to-day basis. And that's why you hire a professional, because you need someone, I use this term a lot, to audit your health habits, both from a personal training standpoint, from a fitness standpoint, and from a dieting standpoint. Even if you think you're doing things perfectly, and maybe you are, there's always a little trick or tidbit here and there that a professional can give you to say, hey, listen, everything looks great, but here's one quick recommendation I would make. I would sub A out sometimes with B or C because you're missing these micronutrients. And I think people don't do that enough. They don't hire someone to, even if they know what they're doing, to sort of audit their current program.
Yeah, totally. There's so much to be said for professionals. And I think you just covered this actually on your podcast recently about hiring someone that is a professional in that area. And one of the things I audit especially is people's thoughts. This is where you just don't even realize. I had a potential client on a free session the other day, and we were pretty much done. And I just said, I'm just going to leave you with one last thing. And then I read back to her, because I was taking notes. I read back to her some of the things she said out loud about herself. And I said, would you ever say those things out loud to another woman? And of course she laughed out of embarrassment. She's like, of course not. And we don't realize sometimes what we're thinking because we think it's fact. We think that what we're saying is fact, and it's having a professional, and in my case, a professional life coach, pointing out your thoughts. Like what you just said right there is, I'm really crappy at this, and you would like, do you really believe that? And just being aware of your thoughts is really actually hard to do. And so just from an audit perspective, that's another great thing to audit, is actually just the way you're thinking about food, the way you're thinking and talking about yourself. It's all really important.
Yeah, in this day and age with social media and the algorithms targeting you and people being such, pigeonholed into these small boxes, seeing the same things over and over, they're even more likely to slip down that road of thinking, you used to, let's say in the 60s or 70s, you're comparing yourself, if you live in a small town in Wisconsin, you got 7,000 people, to everyone in your town. But now it's like, okay, if you're a fitness professional, nutrition professional, whoever you are, and you're following these things, let's say on social media, you're seeing millions of people who potentially are doing the same thing or are in the same demographic as you are. And that's your comp now, right? Not the other 42 kids who are your age in a 2x2 mile square town, but now it's the millions of people who do this, which will lead you down a bad place quickly. And I think it's good to talk out loud to the professionals and say those things sometimes, like your client did, so you could have someone kind of walk you back off that ledge and say, no, this is what you think. The people are presenting this as the norm, but really you're doing great, right? We just need to make 1 or 2 changes here and you'll be back on track.
Yeah, totally.
Speaking about, I want to go down this rabbit hole one last time about the parents, because now my mind is going, the clean the plate mentality, or just pointing out, you haven't eaten, these sorts of things. What else? What other things do potentially parents have done over the years, and I'm not trying to just yell at parents, I'm a parent, that could potentially be bad that you have noticed? Is it like, don't go for seconds quite yet, or pointing out the types of food, or is there anything else that comes to mind that you've dealt with clients who say like, hey, I'm dealing with this stigma from that's happened throughout my childhood?
I think probably the biggest thing is mom was chronically dieting. That's probably one of the most common things my clients deal with is, mom was always on a diet. I have a client that's like, I grew up thinking my mom was fat. She was, like, looking back at pictures, she absolutely was not not really overweight, but my childhood brain used that word. My mom is fat because she used that word. And so the way that we're speaking about our bodies, the way that we speak about food, the way that we speak about just the way that we look it's important. One of the reasons that I got off like the major counting and calculating my food is because I realized I was bringing my kitchen scale to the dinner table in front of my children and weighing my portions. And what I told them was, I'm making sure I get enough protein because I'm lifting weights. And I'm pretty sure they knew I was lying, because what I was doing was trying to limit what I was eating because I was trying to lose weight and I was, not happy with my body, and it really sent a message. And so I think that just the positive speaking about bodies in general, and not pointing out bodies that are different in a negative way. Again, like, I don't want to throw my parents under the bus. I had great parents. Like, seriously, I did. Like, probably none of your listeners really know me or going to look me up, but, and my dad's passed, but, when my dad would describe a person, I was talking to a woman in the grocery store today, right? But the story would always start with, well, I was behind this heavyset woman in the grocery store today. I was right. Like I was speaking to this gentleman who was incredibly thin. Like, for some reason, their body type was always described. And when you do that, it means to the child that body type is important. And so, and obviously it's going to become very clear which body type the parent prefers. So I would say just speaking about people without describing their body type is huge. And then when it comes to food, I like to just talk about the what we get from each type of food. For example, my younger daughter, she's 15. She wants to start lifting weights. She's a volleyball player, and she's like, I just really need to get stronger. And I'm like, absolutely. If you're going to start lifting weights, we really need to make sure you're getting enough protein, because in order to put muscle on, we have to have the fuel there. And just talking to her about eating more, but why, and what that is going to do for her body. And we can do that with little ones as well. This broccoli is really going to give you energy. This apple is going to help you kick and punch and play with your friends. I mean, kick and punch like I'm talking about karate. For some reason that came out. Like when they're like going to their little karate class, or the little there's these at my daughter's gym, they have this like little ninja class, and these kids, they're all like, punching the bags, and it's so fun for them. Well, they need energy for that. And we can talk to them about that food is what gives us energy, and that we need to make sure we're getting most of our energy from the dinners mommy makes or daddy makes, because we make sure to put the foods in there that give us the best energy. And so we don't want to fill up on maybe the snackies or things. And you can have rules. I mean, I had a rule when my kids were young, when they came home from school, you're welcome to have a snack. After 4:00, you can choose vegetables or fruit, because I didn't want them to be choosing Cheez-Its before dinner. I wanted them to be ready to have the protein and vegetables that I was going to be serving at dinner. So if they were truly hungry, you're welcome to have an apple or carrots. And it's not the idea like, well, if you're not hungry enough to eat an apple, you're not hungry. It's just that I was wanting to prioritize nutrient-dense food if they were truly hungry. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense, yeah. And I think it's also naive of some parents, when you were talking initially about they're on a diet, mom's on a diet, to not think that your kids don't notice that you're eating different food than them, right? My daughter's not even 2 yet. And if there's something different on my plate than that's on her plate, she wants that food, right? It's the first thing she notices if there's any sort of differentiation between what I'm eating and what she's eating. So kids know right away. They know that you're eating something different. So obviously the first question is going to be why. So I think it is, as parents, our kids are sponges, and it's important to remember that they're always taking information in and ingesting it in a certain way, and we have to be careful about those decisions that we make and those conversations we have around food long term to ingrain the proper healthy habits.
Yeah. My parents had a saying whenever they would see us sort of mimicking them in any way or doing what they do rather than doing what they say. They just had this saying between the two of them that was, "Aren't you glad you don't smoke?" Which was just their way of saying, look at our kids doing exactly what we're doing. And I've noticed as I've done some of this like primary programmer work with my clients, when we're talking about like, well, what was demonstrated when you were young, and like, what about exercise? I realize, my childhood brain thought exercise was for boys because my mom did not exercise, but my dad did. So men exercise, women didn't. And that took some time for me to get over. It was okay for me to be like on the swim team because that was co-ed. But as far as just exercise for exercise, boys did that. Men did that. Like, what a weird thought, but that was demonstrated. So, as much as we can, we got to think about how we're demonstrating health and the habits of health as well without talking about it. My kids see me in workout clothes before they go to school. They know I'm going to work out. They don't have to see me working out. I don't have to say, I'm going to go and lift weights now. They can just see by what I'm wearing.
Sure. Yeah, makes sense. And, the first thing that came to my mind is actually I sort of had not exactly the reverse, but something else, similar to that, where it was juxtaposed a bit, where my mother was way more apt to eat vegetables and my father never left anything on the plate, right? So if me and my sisters had left food on the plates, those plates were then pushed to him and he had eaten everything, right? So for me, it was like, all the girls are eating the vegetables and Dad and I just eat as much as we can. So, it didn't form any bad habits for me long term, thankfully, at least not consciously. But But you do notice these things and maybe make them specific to mom or dad. And if you happen to be, the son or the daughter, are maybe more likely to take on those characteristics of said parent. Mm-hmm. This has been fantastic information. Why don't you give my audience a little insights into where they can find you? If this is general population, let's say people who want to work with a nutritionist, work with someone like you, or if it's personal trainers or people in the fitness and health industry that have questions and want to see your content, where do you direct them?
Sure. So I'm on Instagram. It's well_with_Lisa. And then my podcast is Eat Well, Think Well, Live Well. And we're going to publish one together as well over there. So I also have lots of guests, but some solo episodes, just like you do, talking about all of these concepts. I give a lot of my best tools on the podcast. So if you are interested in applying some of those, obviously what I think is the most valuable, just like I'm sure with personal training, is the hands-on coaching. So you can see the exercises, but having someone check it with you and have that accountability is really where it's at for getting a lot of progress. So I'd love, if you're interested, I do free sessions. So that first session is always free. If you want to see, I just think the best way to decide if coaching works for you is to get some coaching.
Couldn't agree more. I will put all the links in the description of the podcast when it's released. My guest today has been Lisa Salisbury. Lisa, thank you for joining the Trulyfit Podcast.
Thanks for having me.